A little too much. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll let other people come on in. My name is Richard Taylor, and I work with Karen Holmes Ward in organizing the Charles Ogletree Public Forum Series. And as I've mentioned on a number of occasions, Charles Ogletree was an indefatigable lawyer, civil rights advocate, academic, scholar, and just a great guy. And he passed early from dementia. And we were having forums here really before he passed, but it was in recognition of the forums he used to have at the high school under the Charles Hamilton Houston banner. And every time I see you can turn it down, yeah. My colleagues from Harvard, I say, you all let that place go. I don't see much about it anymore. And, so we'll deal with that another time. But we are making sure that his name stays alive and that the things that he did stay alive. He was a classmate of mine and a very, very good friend. We were very fortunate on Saturday, before we did this, I called his partner for life, Pam Ogletree, and asked her if we could do this. She was very honored, and then she came up Saturday when we had an event for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she hadn't been on the island in 10 years, and she brought her granddaughter and family, so we're all here under the auspices of Charles Ogletree, okay? Great. And what a day. I'm excited about today because Commissioner Hedspeth reached out to me several years ago and wanted to do something around arts, culture. And we have the wonderful Featherstone that we all go to all the time. And she wanted to do more events. So we started 3 years ago at the OB Library, and then we had another one last year. And then she mentioned this unbelievably internationally acclaimed Jonathan Green. And many of you, some of you called me, Coletta, and said, make sure you remind me because I don't want to miss this. So we're so glad. The planes didn't help us. He was a little late yesterday and missed his connection, but he got in this morning. So let me just kick this off if I can. Mr. Green has a 40-year-plus track record of creating art and has a passion for creating and collecting cross-cultural fine art. He is especially known for his book, Gullah Spirit, The Art of Jonathan Green. It has been said that he continues to be the authoritative leader of Gullah visual arts. Commissioner Hedspeth is formerly of the Phillips Auction House, currently serves, as I mentioned, in Chicago as a Commissioner of Arts and Culture. This is her third year curating events with us. Ms. Kara Olich is chair of the African American Art History Institute initiative at the Getty Museum. Two experienced lecturers, art consultants, and scholars who are passionate about African American art and culture. So we needed two people to unpack Jonathan Green. Give him a hand, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay. Thank you for being with us today. This is an incredible moment. I think as we were talking, and if I may, I'd like to call Jonathan, if I may, and Clene, if I may. This is a full circle moment, I think, for particularly me and Clene. Two people, as Richard said, we're very passionate about art and work, and we've been following Jonathan's work since the late 80s, and has just been amazed about the work, his sense of, or grounding in his culture, in the Low Country and in the Sea Islands, and thinking about what that work means to the world and how it's connected and transcended just about every space. You can't really go anywhere in the world without someone referencing Jonathan Green's work. The vibrancy of the colors, his choice of palette, the ideas that connect around the world that we'll talk about, and just his authenticity and just genuineness that comes across. If you've ever been in a talk with Jonathan, if you've seen one online, he is very clear, and it's a wonderful thing to have someone who is as clear as he is doing the work that he has. And he is very special, and we will get into that a bit. We're sitting in the presence of someone who technically 1 out of 80,000 babies, I don't know if you know that, has a special marking that he has, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So why don't we start? So with that, one of the things that I was really interested in about your work, and of course about growing up in the gardens and thinking about how you talk about your environment, and also your love for your church community, as well as, of course, your family, particularly your grandmother. And I was hoping for, many of you may know that information, but could you share a little bit about, just life at that time as a child?
We're older people, it's a lot to talk about, but I'll start somewhere. Honestly, I started out as a farmer. I come from landholders in Beaufort County. My grandmother and grandfather bought 50 acres back in the 30s, right off of Highway 17. And I was always very interested in farming, skilled at farming. I was a Cub Scout, Boy Scout, 4-H club member, Future Farmers of America. I used to speak when I was in junior high school, traveled to various counties in South Carolina speaking on behalf of the importance and the relevance of agriculture. And this would have been back in the middle 60s.
That's right, that's right. And so Jonathan was born with a veil. In the African American community, sometimes they also reference it as a shroud. And it's a caul that where you have like a sheet or membrane that's worn over you. And it's really interesting to be 1 out of 80,000 births. Like it's very, very rare. But it's also a very special marking, and it's taken on some mythical significance. But I enjoyed your remarks in an interview when you said, I knew I was special, and my grandmother knew I was special. And that starts a relationship for you that really, in my humble opinion, I guess I could say, kind of starts this platform, right?
Yes.
To be entered in a world like that, and then it's not common where children are ushered into the world with that sense of being special. So can you talk about a little bit of your relationship with you and your grandmother?
Yes, it all starts at home. When I was born, my grandmother tells the story that it was just a magnificent sky night happening. I was born around 3 o'clock in the morning. And so she and her friends, because back in the day, women would, especially farming women, would get together and talk about things happening. They actually had dialogue conversations. And so they felt that this child that was about to be born, chances are it's going to be a very special child. Now, they had no idea I would be born with the placenta membrane, the veil. And when that happened, it just took it to a whole nother level. To my dismay, I never had friends outside of my immediate family because they did not want me contaminated with my specialness. And that's a very difficult thing for a child to overcome, not to be able to just go out and have friends and relationships with people, only those in the immediate family. So I never really had friends, and I spent most of my time at home under my grandmother's tutelage because she felt that she had to protect me and make sure that I was on the right path for whatever my destiny would be.
So much so that I recall you mentioning a story where I think there was kind of like an art competition.
Yes.
And she fought for you.
Yes.
And she made sure she walked in that school and said, give him his $5.
That's
He
right.
won that competition. And I just think that that's amazing to have that kind of, it kind of to me starts as you look at your career and the wonderful work that you've done, it really starts this path. And so you go through school there, and then you find yourself in Chicago, and this is where you and Clene will intersect because of your work at as a student, right, at the Art Institute of Chicago. where you worked. And I want to talk about that experience. I don't know if there were any maybe distinct changes between living rural and urban. That would be interesting to understand. Like, what was that experience for you, you know?
Well, for most kids living in the Deep South, urban settings were not new because every summer we went north to New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, somewhere because we had family members. But mostly we went there to deliver provisions. Farmers taking food crop up there to various relatives. I was just over the moon excited about being in a place with so many close proximity of people because we lived on a large acreage, 50 acres, and I didn't get to see people every day. On a large farm, you're working all the time. So to be able to see the differences of people and so many of them, and I remember trying to figure out how could they live 4 stories on top of each other. I think I was most fascinated with that more so than everything. And then also not having to deal with dirt for a while. You know, it was all about cement and stores and shops and all the churches and how people dressed. I was just mesmerized with New York City. And every opportunity I had to go to New York, I went. And I went to New York City in middle school also. My mother had us up, and you know, back in the day, most mothers, particularly in the African American family, did not raise their children. The children were raised by grandparents, and the grandparents never felt that mothers were equipped to raise children, but they were equipped to have children, and the more children, the merrier, especially if you lived on a farm. So it was very important to have children back in the 50s when I was born, and for help reasons, to be able to help on the farm and do works and stuff like that. And in New York City, all of my grandmother's sisters lived in New York City. There were 7 of them, 2 boys and 5 girls, and they all lived in New York City, and 2 of them passed as white, so they had secretarial jobs during the daytime in law firms and whatever have you. So my family has always been like the United Nations. There was so much diversity in terms of visual. So you just, it's a whole different perspective as a kid when you grow up in a family like that, where you have different eye color, hair texture, skin color. And that just opens the floodgate for, especially I think, a person becoming an artist, because you're familiar. There are no surprises, no secrets. And even as a kid in middle school, I was always fascinated with finding museums and libraries, and I grew up basically as a lone child, even though I was in a household of about 6 to 8 kids. I just never really socialized that much with kids. And I think, you know, and that was fine with my grandmother because she didn't want me socializing with kids. She wanted me to be protected and to make sure that my destiny was in good hands for my future. I wasn't planning on becoming an artist. When I was in junior high, I was selling hogs to make monies for my family. I was selling the great Duroc hog, which is known for pork bellies and ham, cherry red, beautiful hog. And so I was making monies all of my life. I mean, I would go to the different farms and gather materials or food for the pigs, and I was considered a non-conventional kid because I actually built a self-feeder. So a self-feeder is this contraption that you put the feed in, and the hogs can just eat intermittently whenever they wanted to. And that's for fast growth of the animal. And of course, this is all grains, no slop or anything like that. And I was so fascinated with being a farmer, I wasn't thinking about being an artist, even though I won a prize in the 5th grade, and it was written up in the newspaper as you were referring to. And one of my professors said, well, if you don't know where it is in the paper, then you don't deserve to be in the paper. So I told my grandmother, and she marched up to school and told the professor, look, this is my kid, and you need to respect him if he has won. And this was, I was in the 5th grade, and they thought that I was in high school, and it was a county-wide art contest. And, again, I wasn't thinking of being an artist. I was just copying and tracing. I think many of you have seen the little ads in Look magazine and National Geographic, if you can draw a deer or if you can draw this person and you send it off. Well, the School of Disney wanted to remove me from our home, bring me up to Washington, D.C. to enroll me in the Disney school. And my grandmother stood up and she said, no, you're not taking my child. My child is going to stay here and he's going to finish school. I know where he is, and that's what's most important. So I had enormous protection and support way beyond what I could have imagined and what is needed for the development and the growth of a young artist.
Absolutely. So we come to Chicago. You have the Art Institute, and you're working on your craft and becoming an artist. And it was really interesting, this idea of, formally trained and then going out into the world and saying, I'm going to not really be there as much. I'm going to go out in the world. I'm going to walk around. I'm going to see things. I'm going to take it all in and to produce work. And this is something that one point that Clene will talk about in this talk is the earlier work. Artists, they take a journey, right? They start somewhere. They start with the form. They start with the body, right? These are things, if you're in an art program, you're going to be trained on that. You might be trained on the classics of Cubism and whatnot. But you kind of, you wed these ideas together in a really interesting way because I think you remarked that, I knew what they were going to teach me, and I understood that, but I knew what I was going to do. And so I just want to ask Clene to kind of talk about those earlier works and the form and the thought processes behind that.
Yeah.
Come on.
Can you hear me, everyone? Because it was off earlier. Okay. First of all, I want to thank both of you for being here. This is really spectacular. I have had the honor of working with Jonathan for about 10 years now, and most people don't know that he is referred to as the baby of the WPA, not because he was born necessarily during that time, but because of the artists that he worked with, that he helped process their collection, that they wanted to take out to dinner, that they wanted to be around. And so, most people, the dominant global experience of Jonathan oftentimes is more recent with the Gullah Geechee series. However, the early works that I've seen in so many collections, literally globally, have had a range. I mean, some of your early works truly look like a couture, truly look like you were sitting right next to Catlett. I mean, they truly look very, very different. And so oftentimes people, as you know, will walk into spaces and will not even recognize some of these early works, which are very, very striking. And the way you use color, and it's interesting how every time we talk, which is often, that you talk about your experience growing up, and you won't just say something's red, it becomes something else. It harkens back to an experience you've had. So, being at the School of the Art Institute was I know, very transformative, but you arrived there already knowing who you wanted to talk to, who you wanted to interact with, who you wanted to communicate with. And so can you share just a little bit about what that felt like to be considered the baby of the WPA?
Well, I think I got that because I actually went out and met the artists. And not only did I meet them, and this is in the middle 70s, I also purchased their work with the help of my partner of 47 years, Richard Weedman. So I was immediately looked upon as someone a little unique. There are not too many African-American kids right out of college going around buying artwork from people. But there were so many pieces of artwork in Chicago. I graduated in '82. And right before then, there were so many pieces that were in resale shops that the artists could not make a living off of selling, and many of those pieces were being destroyed over the years. And my partner, Richard Weidman, who has a background in art also, he suggested that we start collecting the WPA artists, and we started collecting by giving them exactly what they asked for. No bargains. Whatever they asked for, that's what we gave them. And they all adopted me. Mr. William Carter, Mrs. Elizabeth Catlett. I worked with Julian Bond and designed the 2009 NAACP program, which was the first time the NAACP has ever given out an award to a living artist. First time in history, NAACP. And we found that there were so many institutions that were just, I wouldn't say did not have the sophistication about artists, but were not prepared to spend that kind of money, whatever money the artist was asking. It's just, it's not a, in the 70s and the 80s, it was not common for people, especially in the area of Chicago where I went to school, African Americans, to purchase art. Now, they did in the 30s and the 40s. Then something happened, and it was just this dry period, and the artist had a very difficult time surviving. When I met Mr. William Carter, he was living in an alternative nursing home, and he was very active. He was selling artwork all around the country, and he took me in and just introduced me to a plethora of WPA artists that were still living. They were in their 70s, early 80s, but they were still living. And we were able to just, especially with his salary, he was making over $100,000 a year back then, which was a lot of money. And he said, just take the money and go out there and find and buy. And that's what I did. So I was actually an art promoter, art consultant, and buyer.
Major collector. And what,
A major collector.
yeah, so going back to some of the early works, and thank you, Dr. Olich, for creating a great slideshow. As I've walked through your work and the way your collecting practice in these many years, I've always tried to figure out what was going on in your life at that time. And so some of your early body forms, watercolors, right? Who were you
related to
around
art.
then? Yes. And then also, we talked a little bit earlier, and you said you didn't mind me talking about the fact that your partner, Richard, has passed. That's coming on a year. And what, toward the end of that, what that you're creating, because you're always creating, what that has changed and what kind of mediums you're using now. But if you could walk through, before you got to the Rice series, but Rice has always been present in your life, obviously, but when you were doing more of your watercolors, body forms, if you could do that.
And I'd just like to add to what Clene's saying. You will see, if you look at the slides as he's talking, they are in chronological order. So when you start to see the body forms, period between, let's say, 87 through the 90s, 82, well, 83 is the first one we have is the Lincoln. But the ones that were selected, I think, so you can see them on the monitors you're talking.
So I was formally trained, classically trained at the Art Institute of Chicago. I majored in the figure and also figure painting. I spent almost 5 years. I also have a minor in education because any artist with common sense knows that you better get a second degree in education just in case, things don't go well. And, but I started out after I left the Art Institute. Can you imagine studying the figure for 5 years and never putting any clothes on it? So I had to learn how to put clothes on a figure, and that took about a year. Not only to put the clothing on, but to put the clothing on and have the clothing related to the atmosphere, the wind, the sun, the rain, whatever it took. And after doing that for a while, I found myself a little depleted of energy. And I became anorexic, and that's where those body pieces came, because my doctor recommended that I join a health club and I physically start getting myself back together. I think many of you have experienced going to college for 5 years. You're just emaciated after schools and testing and not taking care of yourself properly. It's very normal. It's not unusual at all. But I used that opportunity to really focus on my health and fitness. And I'm an overachiever in everything I do. So I developed, I think I started out at 120 pounds and I got up to 190 pounds of muscles. But I felt so awkward. I felt like I couldn't move. So I wanted to at least, what am I calling it? Just make that a part of history in my art. I want to document that because that was a very important part of my career as an artist, to document what I was going through emotionally, physically. I also am a person that is dyslexic and autistic. So I have my challenges and always needing help in some capacity, some way. You know, for normal things like shopping, deciding what to get, what to eat, all of those things you never pay much attention to. So I really focused on my health, and I used my health as a platform to get into this human variation series, which I did for about 2 years. I think I did about 200 paintings of that series. And then,
Family series is part of that too?
no, that comes later.
Okay.
Also, I only work, my entire career, I've only worked in series. So I'm not a one-painting artist person. I work multiple times. I thought I recognized you. And so I learned from the masters. When I was a student at the Art Institute, I spent most of my time in the museum because I was interested in studying and being like the artist on the walls, not my peers. Because my peers were, you know, learning and trying, but I just felt slightly more advanced. I had completed 3 years of military service, and I also had completed a year in textile design, because I thought I might be good in that field. And my first sort of gig in that world was with the American fashion designer Bob Mackie. And so that's why you see so much patterns and decorative coloring in so much of my work because of that background. And then I remember going to Europe, my first time going to Europe, and it was mostly in Northern Europe, England and north of England. And all of the artists that I met said to me, "You are much better off as an artist if you paint what you know." And I heard that clearly, and I came back to Chicago and went home to visit my mom in Beaufort, South Carolina. And I remember sitting out on the marsh in Beaufort and looking out at the grasses, and I was so mesmerized. It is the most difficult thing imaginable to draw and to paint grass. But I studied it because I wanted to perfect it, because I knew it was going to be a major part of my expression as an artist from the Gullah Geechee culture. Now, as a kid, I didn't know the term Gullah. I had heard the term Geechee, but I never heard the term Gullah when I was young or at the Art Institute of Chicago. That came much later with Verda Mae Grossner, whom I knew very well. And she was very instrumental. She was working with NPR, very instrumental in having me to settle into understanding and representing my culture. Because up to that point, I mean, there wasn't, you know, even though you had the WPA painters at Penn Center, some of them were at Penn Center, I never met any of them. Of course, I wasn't born. And I just didn't have enough information or relationships with artists. So I depended on what I saw in the museums. And of course, my favorite art period was Impressionism. And why? Because in Impressionistic paintings, it doesn't matter what color you think someone is. You're just seeing a variety of shades of colors. You know, they're in the shaded area, they're in the sun area. And in my studies, because I love reading and studying about artists, I learned that Impressionism was due to the fact that most of the artists had cataracts, so they couldn't see very well. And that's why Impressionistic art looks the way it looks, because they really couldn't see that well.
One question, just going back to your early works, because I think it's so key. You know, I'm very fascinated by your early works. The fact that you're creating and things are moving into certain collections, you were very, very intentional. And that's why sometimes it's hard for me to track things down, because you were very, very intentional, and those people were like, oh, I don't want to talk about what I have in my collection and things like that. Was that from, you know, your experience of growing up on a farm, seeing business? Was that from Richard? Where was that? Because you're creating and still having somewhat of a little bit of a business hat on at the same time, early on.
Came from my family. My mother owned a nightclub. My grandfather was a moonshiner and a sharecropper. My mother was a beautician. I have family members that are mortician. I have family members. My father's people own small community stores. So I've always had a business sense. I was very active in my church, the Huspa Baptist Church, which was erected in 1865 in Gardens Corner, South Carolina. So our sense of history in terms of, we were talking about it early, being a Southerner it's imperative that you know who you are and where you're from. And our greatest tribute, respect, goes to the plantations, because it was my people that built the plantations, maintained the plantations, and they still do, many of them. So as Southern kids from the Low Country, we are very familiar with that. Our cemeteries are on plantation properties, and plantations are not intimidating, because you know who did the work. It's not about who owns it, it's about who has done the work. So when I go onto a plantation site, I'm in awe of what my ancestors have done for so long, and to be such humble people, people with respect, people with dignity. So I came from great stock from that perspective.
I'm a Southerner too, and I just, when I think about that, I think about the ecosystem, and what you're talking about, and I think that I'm so glad that you made that point, because one of the things is, and I think it resonates in your work, is to underscore this idea that with all the oppression, we talk about resiliency, right? But there's joy, there's economics, there's activity there, like there's, Black people are just not in this oppressive space, always been able to take whatever space we were in and do what we needed to do. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when you think about that system, everything from childcare to foodways to health, yes, clothing, right? Often is coming from the hands of, enslaved Black people. And I think that also, when you think about the idea of indigo, like the making of a pigment, right, coming out of that experience. And you could see that in your work and how it resonates within. And there are other aspects that you've pulled in. You were also going to like operas and participating and taking in other arts, right, performative and other things to really inform your practice. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
So my grand-aunts, whom were my mother's dearest and closest friends, said to me as a young kid when I was in New York in middle school, they said, you should take, because they knew I had the capacity to draw, that ability, and they said, you should take in everything possible, because it will all work for you in the future in the end. And that's what I did. When I was a student at School of the Art Institute, I became a security guard because I wanted to live in the museums. I was just fascinated with being in an entire museum that I could walk through and meet and talk with people. That was really my first gig in the business side of the arts as a student. And then also I could, I could understand more about history and culture from the various sort of decades of artists and what they painted. So that was very important to me. And I remember my first year at the Art Institute of Chicago, I saw two works that I felt comfortable with. One was by my mentor, Mr. Jacob Lawrence, and the other was by Mr. Alex Katz, who was an illustrator, then became a well-known painter from the New York area. And when I saw those two pieces, I said to myself, there's not enough of us in this museum. So I'm going to dedicate my entire life to painting about people that look like me.
The Jacob Lawrence connection is really strong. I think it's also the narrative storytelling, and also in the series, right? Because Lawrence worked primarily with series, starting with the Toussaint Louverture
That's
series.
where I learned series
That's
from.
And so that relationship is really exciting that you mentioned that. I wanted to, if we could maybe make a pivot, I want to talk about the works that really represent, you know, when you mentioned you were a farmer, when I went back, well, you were farming, but you thought you were going to be a farmer. Went back to look at your work and looked at how the idea of farming comes and resonates, because it does material, rightfully so, it's coming up now, some of the images. But that shift into that space, starting to paint what you know, and documenting in a way that's so closely grounded in those experiences. So, you know, how did you from narrative form to dealing with the body, your own personal relationship with that, to going back to this idea of painting what you know, where did that pivot happen? And did you decide to, as you said, you were sitting there and spinning grass, did it crystallize then? Like, I'm looking at, you know, this beautiful space, I'm looking at people working, you know.
So for me, the pivot was the challenge. If I'm to paint about the South, I have to paint grass, I have to paint trees, I have to paint fields and animals and people and houses, just everything to tell a complete story. So I always consider myself not the artist in galleries and even necessarily in museums. I was the artist of collectors. I was more interested in the people collecting my work rather than being a prop in a gallery or anywhere else. And I felt stronger value to that because I always wanted to get to know people. That was very important to me. And I've always had the advantage not to sell to anyone I don't want to. And that's a privilege as an artist. Not too many artists can say that. But when you have a great supportive home, and in Chicago, when I met Richard, he was the Deputy Commissioner of the Joint Commission Accreditation of Hospitals. He was 37 and I was probably about 22, 23 years old.
Or 19.
Or 19. But I say this to help you imagine, in 1977, to have met a Euro-American from South Dakota who had a highly prized job in Chicago. He was appointed by Mayor Daley Sr. And at the time, he lived at the Seneca Hotel. I integrated the Seneca Hotel in Chicago. I integrated many restaurants in Chicago. But I wasn't intimidated, nor was I fearful, because I was, partnership is key, I think, to any talent. If there's a great talent, it's that partnership is key. And then without that partnership, there is a fast demise of an artist, because we're so exploited by the masses in terms of, giving and promising and all of those things. So it's very difficult to keep a focus. And Richard was always extremely helpful in that. And also, he was my art manager. So of all the museums that have come to our studios over the years, all of the curators and the directors say that they have never met or seen, and Clane can attest to this, anyone that had the ability to record an artist's work and to have it sort of presented in such a way. So I've done over 5,000 paintings sold, and for every painting, there's a photograph. And back in the day, I remember the first transparency cost $50. And then, of course, now it's like $200, $250. Well, they don't use transparencies, but just digital. And so you have to understand the cost of being a well-known artist. I'm well-known because of my residuals, because of the calendars, the postcards, the note cards, the 2 coffee table book, and other children's books. That's what makes you known, not being in a museum. Being in a museum and even in a gallery, you're only known to a small group of people. I mean, it could help elevate your finances, but it does not elevate your celebrityism, your fame, or the caring of people towards you and what you have done. So I've never had to worry about anything for 47 years in terms of the business side. And I traveled a lot. Richard always made sure that I got out at least 2 to 3 times a year, go to Europe or Asia, anywhere just to take a break, to take a mental break. I suffered being paralyzed in both arms because of tendinitis. That's holding the palette and holding the brush for hours in and hours out. And in terms of health, which is also very important, I opted for physical therapy rather than surgery. And I think the best thing I could have done was to go with the physical therapy rather than the surgery, because it has, you know, it's always about relearning. And when I was paralyzed, I had to learn how to draw, paint. It took me about 2 years, but it's just constant work.
Can I step in for a
I was
minute?
going to ask you a question.
No, go
too,
ahead.
but
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Step in.
Okay.
And ask a
Just
follow-up.
about your practice, most people, a lot of people, because you're so very private in this way, do you mind sharing just a little bit how it is that you will sit down in front of paper or canvas? What is your process? Is it mostly outside? Is it inside your studio, your fabulous studio? As of now, I mean, you don't have to go all the way back, but some
Well, I
iterations.
think going back is important because my, coming from a farming community background, I was never intimidated about work. I was never intimidated about putting the hours in. And I always fashioned myself after the monastery, the monks. The time, the hours, the dedication that they put into their works. And I've been heavily loved and enjoyed by many monastic people, nuns, all of those people, because I think they realized in me as an artist that I wasn't intimidated with work. And there's no way you can be a successful artist without the work. You have to put the work in.
You're working in so many different formats as well. You've moved across in terms of,
I told you I was
Making-
dyslexic.
so
So I started out in textile. That was the first, big shift after military. And then I've done theater, I've done opera, done symphony, where my work is incorporated into all of these various disciplines of the arts. Fashion. I wasn't thinking about doing everything possible, surrounding the arts, architecture. But I did, because the opportunities aroused. And I just said, well, why not? Let me go for it. And Spoleto USA, which is we're celebrating our 45th year in Charleston, South Carolina, was a tremendous, helpful, supporting catalyst for me. This is an international festival that's in Charleston, and I have done 2 posters, which are their top-selling posters in their history. And again, that goes back to the fan base, the audience of people that knew of my work, supported my work, from Florida to South Carolina to New York, California, I mean, just about everywhere. And I was also, I don't know how I did it all, but I was also a great volunteering person. I volunteered for a lot of things. I made it my business to go to the institutions that no one at the Art Institute told me about. Not one student told me about the Southside Community Arts Center or the DuSable Museum. And I found both those places through reading and actually took a cab out to the institutions to meet the people and to learn more about WPA artists. My relationship with Chicago people goes back to my earliest connection would be with the great Mrs. Etta Moten Barnett, who was the first silent screen black actress. And then from there, the great Mrs. Gwendolyn Brooks, Mrs. Elizabeth Catlett, Mr. William Carter, Sam Gilliam, I mean, all of these people. And that's just in the arts. But I have a huge fan base in literary work as well. And many writers have used my work and also have written about me. The great Pat Conroy wrote the introduction, the foreword to my first book. So, you know, those are the kinds of relationships because I'm always available. I'm always volunteering. I'm, you know, just being very active into the communities, very active in politics. In our home in Chicago, if you didn't have a voter's registration card, Richard wouldn't let you in. So, I mean, that's the kind of world that I came from as an artist, and also coming from a mixed world, you know, a bicultural, bilingual world in terms of being black and then being in a white world. I mean, this, you know, so the mixing of those two creates such a higher interest point in your vision and your aspirations because you don't have any hang-ups. So I never was intimidated to go in any museum or into any collector's home. One of my great supporters in Chicago was Mrs. Essie Kupsinet. And I was on the board of the Alternative School of the Performing Arts, to which Oprah Winfrey was on the board and several other people. So I got around a lot living in Streeterville in Chicago. And both Johnson families, the magazine and the hair Dory Wilson, who was one of the most fabulous PR persons, who was the first black woman photographed by Victor Strepneski in the 60s. Al Ashford, the brother of Ashford and Simpson. You know, so I knew all of these people because of my location, because of my zip code. And it just, it afforded me to move into all of these pockets of people throughout my career as an artist.
Well, I wanted to ask Clene, because Clene has a very wonderful career, worked at DeSable, worked at Phillips, now is a commissioner for Chicago in arts and culture. And when you mentioned the art market, that's where I was. You mentioned something about the art market. I want you to kind of think about that because it is a very unique opportunity that you didn't have to rely on the market, but also at the same time, you're very industrious in creating your own market in a way, which speaks to that kind of strength that you've talked about. And so, Clene, can you share some information about how you've seen that market over the years? Could you talk about that gap, like what happened for the Works Progress Administration, those artists? It happened, Langston Hughes, everyone. By the time the 60s and 70s, I'm sorry, I'm talking to him. By the time the 60s and 70s kind of evolve, you're right, the light starts to fade a bit. So you want to share a bit about the market and how the fluctuation in the market as it relates to Black artists?
Jonathan is one of the very few that doesn't go up on Park Avenue, but has the most robust private market. And when we talk about an auction world, right, there's the silent auction where only people are invited. But when you look in at these collections, especially international collections, there's usually a Jonathan Green. And so that's been very fascinating when you're not expecting it, or they're onto a different kind of collecting focus. And you're like, oh my gosh, this piece, would you be interested in maybe the artist might want to purchase it back? Well, no. Yeah, you have purchased it back. But I think exactly with all the things he said is that he was able to be intentional. And let's be honest, Mr. Green, some people were very angry that you would not sell to them, and some very well-known famous celebrities were angry that you would not sell to them. Very publicly, they were angry. And so Yeah. I think in your mentorship also with young artists, you always champion for them to assert themselves while they're there, why they can. Because once it goes onto a different market, it's no longer in your hands. And so I've seen you craft, and Richard craft contracts that were pretty much like, you better keep it or you better call us. That's your only options. And so I think that's why you've had that longevity, as you've talked about. And, you know, I'm going to share it now a little early, but, you know, we're giving Jonathan a retrospective in Chicago in the fall of next year. And so we're very, very, very excited about that.
Based on the timeline.
Based on the timeline. And
Very important.
yes. And so to see a lot of the works that like a lot of people are not unaware of. So being able to, I think, knowing exactly where, like you said, where you were, your background, believing in your work, and having that network and that partnership allowed you to command and maintain ownership of what you created in your visual language to the world, creating an entire new Southern aesthetic is very important.
Something you touched on, and I think there's Brenda Lauderback over there. She's a testament to the young artists that Rich and I both have worked with, because she's bought some of their work. And, you know, you're only as great as an artist if you have young people in your footsteps. And because those young people are great advocates, and they need the money, and most young artists, it's very difficult for them to find collectors to buy and collect their work. And I have Marilyn here in the front row. I mean, Mrs. Washington, I have numerous long-term relationship with my collectors. And the relationship has followed into the third generation. I'm 70, so I have a plethora of artists around me that are working. And what does that do? They then talk about you and share what you have done to others. So those are ways of keeping your name in the limelight. Even as an older person, you're not out there as much. I'm painting just as much. I'm just not out there as much. But you have the young people out there facilitating that role for you.
I think we're doing a Q&A.
Yes, we're going to go into Q&A. And so now we are going to open it up for questions. One of the things we wanted to share with you is one of the pieces that comes to mind when you think of the vineyard is the reception. The colorful images of folk coming together to celebrate. And so we'll open it up, and does anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Green?
I traveled all the way from Charleston.
Yeah.
Someone
Yes.
please ask me a question.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Nobles McDaniel. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh,
wonderful.
South Carolina.
Yes. My question is, years ago I heard you talking about you were born with a veil over your face.
Yes.
But I've forgotten how you said it had impacted your life, and I wanted to hear that.
Oh, it impacted my life because of the elders, my grandmother and all of her peers around me. That's a West African, and it's also Asian. It's in Mexico, South America. It's a sign of greatness. So learned people are very familiar with that. And the reason the veil is so special as well is you're all familiar with crib death. Well, crib death has to do with not removing the placenta membrane from the nostrils of the child. So you have to be an older, experienced person to know that the child is suffocating, and you have to remove it all very carefully. And the child gets a new rebirth, because it's all about breathing. So once all the membrane has been removed, and then you spank the child again, and then it breathes. Good question.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Hollifield. I'm from Miami, Florida. I met Mr. Green and Mr. Weedman 1990.
Early.
I wanted to ask you, we met you in Naples, and then you ran away to South Carolina.
Good reason. I had a good reason to run away.
Is there anything, and you had a lovely environment, is there anything about the Florida environment that you took with you when you ran away and left us in Florida?
Well, so let me say this. My attraction to Naples, Florida was the similarity in landscape and textures as in Beaufort, South Carolina. So I felt very much at home in Naples, Florida. Now, my departure had to do with Bernie Madoff, because all of my collectors lost everything. When Bernie Madoff was discovered, honestly, people were committing suicide all over parts of Florida. And in Naples, Florida, almost every day someone was committing a suicide. And I knew that the art market had crashed and that I would probably not be able to, actually I didn't sell anything for almost a year. And of course, pivoting, I went to paper. And I came up to Charleston, to the Charleston Place Hotel, checked in for a weekend, and I remember doing about 30 works on paper and selling them all. And that was just a good sign that it was time to move. And also I was just tremendously frightened for Richard with the concerns of the python, because he had a weak heart, and those snakes are opportunists. And on a 35-acre property, he's walking out there. That snake will sit in a tree for weeks if it detects your heart rate and that it's slow. And I was just so intimidated by that. And they found a 35-foot python right at our gate. So it was just time to leave Florida. That's why. Well, I miss you all too. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr.
Hello.
Green. It is truly a pleasure to meet you. I have been out at workshops today and I'm exhausted, but I did not want to miss the opportunity. I became aware of your work. It's been a few decades ago now, and I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and there was a beautiful market, and they had a lot of your artwork there. But what has struck me is your use of bold, deep hues when depicting African Americans in your work. And I wanted you to talk about why I'll see kind of that interplay of the very dark, the black, the deep tones, and then that very fair tone. Can you talk about kind of what you were thinking or what you want to invoke when you use the interplay of different skin tones?
Good question.
You okay?
Every image in a painting, chances are it's about or around family members or friends. From Gardens Corner, I was very specific in wanting my entire career to be focused around the people from Gardens Corner, South Carolina. And in terms of the vibrancy of the colors, my practice of painting has to do with the Verdaccio method. So the canvas is painted 6 to 8 times before it's completed. And in terms of the intensity color-wise, I love using the primary colors, because from the primary colors you can create anything. Yes. So the black and the blue and the purple and the red and the yellow on the skin, that is a reflection. So if you're out in the sun working, or if you're just out in the sun and you start to perspire, if you have very, very dark skin, you're going to see a hint of blue. If you have very light skin, you're going to see a hint of whatever color that's nearest you. So that's where that comes from. As a child, I was just fascinated with seeing those illusions.
like Jonathan. Brenda Lauterbach from Charleston, South Carolina. As you mentioned, you've been painting for many, many years, and you also are involved in other areas of the arts. Can you share what inspires you each day?
People, family, friends. That is the inspiration. It's not so much for me as a person now 70 years old. It's not about, my paintings are about memory mostly. So I have a very photographic memory, so I can recall things, and then my ability to implement it on a paper or canvas. But I start out very simplistically in terms of my approach to anything, and then I develop it because I'm working in the context of a story. So I might construct anywhere from 20 to 30 paintings, which gives you a lot of time to think about what you're doing and to emphasize certain things in the work. It's just a fabulous way to paint, and it's something that's very, very difficult for most artists to do. And, but I've been fortunate to have had the types of relationship in my life that I could just focus primarily on my work, what I want to do, and do as much of it in great comforts. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you, because learning more about your life has been amazing. Sherman Edmiston, and my mother's side of the family is from Charleston, so I notice there's a lot of people from Charleston here, so that's been amazing. But you mentioned William Carter.
Yes.
And he's one of my favorite artists, and I just wanted to learn a little bit more about your relationship with him.
Well, my relationship with most artists is always that of being the younger one, being a child, if you will. My role is primarily to be there, to be supportive of them, to do whatever that's needed, and to observe and to learn. Mr. Carter, even though he lived in a semi-retired home, he had more contact with people around the country than any gallery I knew of, because he was one of the few African Americans that was selling artwork of the WPA era. So he had from Charles White to Elizabeth Catlett to all of those artists. And so he kept movement happening. And as a young person, I was still in college when I met him. Actually, we didn't know, Richard and I didn't know that there were any surviving WPA artists. It was just by happenstance that we met him, and I went over to his studio and just never left. And then Richard, who's kind of an A-type personality, he goes over there and he just buys everything. And so that just, when the older artists notice a younger person being supportive of them, they just open the floodgates. And any and all that you need to know, it's there. So I would go and do a little cleaning for him, do a little cooking for him, run to the stores. We didn't talk about art that much. Didn't have to. I was just observing him paint, and he loved working in charcoal. He was also a very multifaceted artist. He worked in charcoal, oils, tempera. He did everything imaginable, and silk screens, lithographs, and I was just fascinated with his eclecticness of being an artist. And for the years, he lived to be, I think, 84 years old. I got him a show in Savannah, South Carolina, do you remember Alan Stringfellow? Well, Alan Stringfellow was a close friend of Mr. Carter, and there was a very famous television anchor person, I can't call his name right now, but he also had a gallery in Chicago, along with Isabel Neal and some other people. And it's just being at the footstep. I mean, if you're young and you want to learn from older people, you just have to be at their feet.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. I am.
Like your top.
Thank you. I am William D. Carter III, ironically enough.
Wow.
No relation to the other William Carter. Okay, I am a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with my doctorate of education. And my question is, how have you used storytelling through your paintings? And also, what is your sense of calling?
Well, storytelling and my sense of calling will all come in fruition with the Jonathan Green Maritime Cultural Center. And this is under the auspices of the University of South Carolina, which is going to be built in Beaufort, South Carolina. And this project, along with my dear friend, Dr. Kim Long, and she and I have been traveling internationally for about 10 years to port cities to actually see and learn more about market women. How many of you are familiar with market women? Well, market women are those great African women that ruled the roost when it came to trade and negotiations. No Africans were ever sold by men. All of the enslaved Africans were sold by the market women. And those market women also traversed the globe and taught other women from different countries, from Asia, Mexico, South America, Europe, about selling and to be self-sufficient. That was the real big drive. Queen Charlotte was a major supporter in helping women to be able to stand on their feet. It was she that built the hospital that the royal family attends. It was she that created a sewing factory. Is a very specific type of a lace factory for many of the enslaved women that got to Europe and didn't have anything to do, and also a lot of white women. And so this museum is, you know, we're all in the dark. Black, white, yellow, green, I don't care what color you are. We're completely in the dark in terms of the contributions of African culture to the world. And that's why the center is titled the Jonathan Green Maritime Cultural Center, because if you know nothing about maritime, you know nothing about history. Good question, thank you.
Hello, Annette Guzman from Chicago by way of Atlanta, Georgia. So I've been introduced to your work through my good friend Clane, and immediately when I saw it, growing up going to St. Simon Island in the history of Gullah Geechee, it makes me think about the importance of, ensuring that our history is transferred to generation after generation after generation. And hearing you talk about being the baby of the WPA and how they kind of brought you up and mentored you and showed you their history so that you could continue it on, I'm curious, as we look to the future and the need to preserve our history in a time where it seems like our history is trying to be erased, how are you bringing up the next generation of artists, and are there any artists that excite you today that are looking to preserve that history as well?
Oh, everyone that I've worked with, all of the young artists I've worked with, I think one of the most brilliant young artists is Fletcher Williams. Fletcher Williams is a craftsman and an artist. He went to art school in New York. And then there's Rainier Llanes, who's from Cuba. We bought him out of slavery. Back in the 90s, we paid $10,000 for him. And then there is, there are about 8 of them that we have nurtured and supported and helped them to get on their feet. That's really the goal. And the first and best way to do that is to invest in them. And Mrs. Washington knows about that because she's met many of them when she would come to the studio, she and Mr. Washington. And so one of the best, and I started doing this probably in my 40s, just recognizing how important it is to take an artist. In Naples on our estate, we had the space, the room, to entertain these artists. We in Naples, Florida, many of people would ask me, well, Jonathan, do you have any black friends? So what Richard and I started doing was having a reception, and that reception went on for about 15 years in Naples, Florida, where we would invite a very well-known African-American artist, Geraldine McCullough, you know who she is, and Mr. William Carter. So we would, every year, we would have them come down, pay their way first class, put them up in our home, and introduce them to about between 300 and 500 people at a party. That's how it works. If you can do it, that's how it works. And buy their work, of course. Yes.
Hello.
You look familiar. Do I know you?
You might.
Okay.
You're one of the first artists that I collected. I'm Valerie Cooper, and I have a company called Picture That. And I want to thank Clene for bringing you here because I've never had an opportunity to meet you in person. But I did buy my first original from Sawaku Gallery back in the late 80s. I was a new collector on Wall Street, and collecting was the thing to do. I then went on to buy 2 prints from Mojo Portfolio. So I know you sharing the chores and First Sunday. I know you as a New York City artist, National Black Fine Arts Show, and didn't know much about your career in Charleston at all because I think I met you there first. Did you have a New York City career at all, or were the galleries just representing you back in the late 80s?
So in New York, I was in the June Kelly Gallery for several years. And I lived in New York. I went to middle school, 2 years of middle school in New York City. And then I returned to conclude my education at Roosevelt High in the Bronx. And from there, I went into the military and then on to college. And of course, I would go to New York almost every summer to visit my relatives. So New York played a crucial role in that all of the businesses that I was interested in was so accessible. It was just a matter of, I lived on Lexington Avenue, 101st Street, so I would just walk down Lexington Avenue to the 50s and the 40s, and I'll never forget walking into the library on 59th Street. I mean, the fact that I could just walk into this grand facade of a building and just see hundreds, thousands of books. I'm also a bookophile because I had to learn how to read. I had a sunstroke, so I lost my capacity to read. So I had to learn to read again. And I was just fascinated to be able to walk into a place using my index fingers. It's the only way I can really read. And, but I like taking on any challenge that is going to be worthwhile to me in the future. And I just felt New York was one of those big challenges with the Mojo Portfolio. This is a silkscreen lithograph company that was in Hoboken, New Jersey. And so they, and Maureen and Joseph, because I knew Joseph before Maureen, but he had been working with artists in New York for over 20 years by the time I met him, some of the most famous artists in and out of those galleries. So I just and that happened because of the, I gotta get my history together here, the Javits Center. That's where the first collection of works with Mojo Portfolio happened through the Javits Center. And I met Joseph through June Kelly. So that's how that happened. Good question. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Monique Della Penna from Philadelphia. And I just wanted to know, like, how do you decide what to paint? Or if you're doing a series, how do you figure out what that looks like?
Oh, good question. Well, it starts with an idea. And then the idea is to transfer it into drawings, hundreds of drawings sometimes. And then you select from maybe 100 drawing, you select 20 or 30 of them as to the direction of the series that you want to paint, you know, what specifically of interest of all of those drawings you want to paint. And then I hand draw those, and I put them in a portfolio and wait on the collectors. And when they decide that they like a drawing, then I ask them what size, because I usually work in about 4 sizes, 8 by 10, 11 by 14, 36 by 40, 18 by 24, and 36 by 48, and prices accordingly. I think the other part to the success is that when someone comes to my place, my studio, my gallery, they never have to question price because they know by the size exactly what it's going to cost. And that's also very, very important. But yeah, it all boils down to the drawings and what direction you want to take with the drawings. And as in, well, the rice field, I did about 100 of those drawings, different types of drawings. This is the black and white. And then you just develop it into a series.
Time, we'll have 2 more questions, or are there 2 more questions? I believe you. And then we will close for the evening.
Hi, my name is Leslie Rucker. I'm from San Diego, California, and I probably knew less about you than anyone in this room. But you seem to be what I would call chosen for your career, your talent. You had people when you were very young who were so supportive of you. Did you ever, even in your youth, think what else I could do? Or maybe I love the art, but maybe I want to do anything else. I can't imagine, just from what I've heard today, that you are anything but an artist and a chosen artist.
Well, as an artist, I've done just about everything I could imagine doing in the art field, but I was offered a scholarship by Ruth Page as a dancer. I've never danced on stage in my life, but she saw how I walked, and she offered me a full scholarship. But I was mature enough, I was already in my 22, 23 years old, and I knew dancers. I knew Mr. Alvin Ailey, Mr. Arthur Mitchell, Larry Holmes. I knew Nina Scheinflug. I knew all of these artists because Richard was a dance aficionado. He loved dance. And I also knew that the career as a dancer would be very short. And I just couldn't imagine getting involved in a discipline that was timely. Good question.
Good afternoon. I'm
Hello.
Ann Smith, and thank you, Richard, always for the shout out for Featherstone. I run the year-round community art center here. While I appreciate the exclusivity of those who own your unique originals, I also appreciate the fact that I think you're extremely accessible to so many. You talked about the residuals of your cards, your beautiful scarves and luxury items that for those who can't afford your originals, that they're able to still collect and love and appreciate you. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the business of art and how you make those decisions of who can use your art on a book cover or who can produce a gorgeous shawl, or how you make those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. So much of that came from the great Dr. David Driscoll. He told me when he met me, I was in college, he said, "Young man, most people are not going to be able to afford your work, but what you can do is be very much interested and involved in making residuals." And that's how I started the poster collection, which we now have about 90 in the collection. And let me say this first. So much of it comes out of volunteering. I mean, that's how I got most of my acromens. It's just volunteering. And so many people would ask me for donations, and I just couldn't do it, hate not being able to help, and so I started with the posters. And the advantage of the posters for me is that it teaches one to fish rather than giving them fish. And so I've done about 90 posters and 25 years of calendar making and note cards, and as you said, scarves and all kinds of things. purses. I just think it's I may not know who I am as an artist, but I know who I am as a person. And I think being a great person is really important. Right.
I'm sorry. We have one more question in the front row.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
It's me.
it's you.
Hi, I'm Anna Laszlo. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I wanted to just ask you, all of your paintings, as this gentleman indicated, are really rich in storytelling and evocative story, and many of them, when I look at them, I can imagine the story behind what is going on with your people, whether it's a wedding or the reception. But my favorite is Breath of Freedom.
Oh.
And I don't know if a lot of people know that wonderful story, and can you talk about how it inspired you? It's a magnificent work.
Okay. Great question. Well, let me answer the reception first. It's up on the screen. That was a commission by Seagram's, and I rarely do commissions. But with a name like Seagram's, you're not going to turn that down, right? And then Breath of Freedom. Breath of Freedom started out, again, it goes back to volunteering. In Charleston, South Carolina, Judge Richard Gerkel, who was the judge presiding over the Mother Emanuel 9 case, he wanted to do something really special, and it had amounted to basically a celebration of some kind. And he said to his friend Jonathan, he said, "Jonathan, would you just do me a little sketch?" You know, so many people say that, just do a little sketch. So, there was a part of me that wanted to say no, but then the occasion was so auspicious, so I said, let me just think about this. And then the more I thought about it, the more impact came from it. Because he told me the story of Thurgood Marshall being there and being really uncomfortable being there with Judge Waiters Waring, and that Judge Waiters Waring looked out of the window of the courthouse with Thurgood Marshall there and was just overwhelmed with the number of black people voting in the, what would that be, the 30s, 40s? It's just 40s, so overwhelmed. And so I took all of that in. I said, well, if this occasion happened, then it has to be documented. And that's the other big part to being an artist, is you have to realize the value of documentation. Because if you don't document it, you lose it. And as an educator, historian, you well know that. And of course, you can only write about so much. You need the artwork to write about. So we are working on behalf of you. Give you something to write about.
We'll ask Richard to come up to make some closing comments. And thank you so much, Jonathan, for just sharing your life story. Because it is about your life. Your work is your life. So just another round of applause for
settling in at 7.
I know. And also an applause for Commissioner Clene Hespeth. I just want to share with you, there are not many African Americans who can operate in the art market, who can really work on the behalf of artists. And as you said today, that we are losing our art, but we're also losing the art practitioners who champion that work. And so I just want to say also thank you, and we're looking forward, on behalf of everyone, we're looking forward to the survey next year, and just congratulations on all the work that you've done.
Wonderful moderator. I was struck by many things, but one thing I want to punctuate. Jonathan said, I might not know who I am as an artist, but I know who I am as a person. And that's what we saw tonight. Give him another hand, please. Thanks for coming. Look forward to 1 or 2 more this summer, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks very much. You guys were great.